subject today, the black Muslims in America. Your host is Eric F. Goldman, professor of history at Princeton University and author of Rendezvous with Destiny and The Crucial Decade.
The census of 1960 indicated that about 18 million of our citizens, or some 10.5% of the total population, are Negroes. Since World War II, the struggle of these Negroes for equality in American society has been certainly the most spectacular and probably the most significant feature of domestic American life. But all the while the Negro has struggled for this equality, observers have been noting something of a change in his tactics and something of a change in the mood of millions of members of that people. The general impression has been that there is a growing militancy, a growing impatience with gradualism, a growing unwillingness to wait. Among the militant movements which Negroes have founded and built during this period, perhaps the most publicized and certainly one of the most important is the black Muslims. They are our subject today, where they came from, what they are, and where perhaps they are going. Our panel, here to my right, Mr. Malcom X, minister of the Temple of Islam No. 7 in New York City, and generally acknowledged to be the No. 2 leader in the national black Muslim movement. Mr. C. Eric Lincoln, professor of social philosophy at Clark College in Atlanta, and author of the new volume, The Black Muslims in America, the first serious scholarly study of this movement, and a book which has been called by the authoritative Gordon Alport one of the best technical case studies in the whole literature of the social sciences. The distinguished American writer, Mr. James Baldwin, author of the novel Go Tell It on the Mountain and the book of commentary, Notes of a Native Son. And George S. Schuyler, associate editor of the powerful newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, and a man who has long enjoyed an international reputation as a journalist. Mr. Lincoln, may I ask you to start us, you as the author of this scholarly study, with a comment on what you consider to be the nub of the black Muslim program?
It will be difficult in a few words to set out the nub of the black Muslim movement because it is very, very many things. But I think for our purposes today, one could say that the black Muslim movement is essentially a movement of social protest, which moves upon a kind of religious vehicle. It's a movement among many thousands of America's Negroes, principally those Negroes who belong to the lower economic class, and a kind of a struggle to find their way and to find their place in the nation's society. Or perhaps I should better say, in an attempt to set up their own society, a black nation of Islam.
That would be its general approach. Could we get a little more specific? Mr. Schuyler?
Well, yes, of course, I have read this very excellent book by Mr. Lincoln, and I've been following the movement of Muslimism, particularly as expounded by Mr. X, for some time. I think that one of the bases, of course, for the anti-Christian, anti-white view is that the white Christians were responsible for slavery in the world, and that for this reason they are to be cast into the outer pale. Now that's one of the many falsehoods upon which this movement is founded. As a matter of fact, the Muslims carried on slavery for something like 12 or 1300 years before the white European Christians started it. I think that one of the outstanding slave traders in Africa, who has a monument to him in Zanzibar, is Tipu Tip, who devastated all Central and Eastern Africa.
Mr. Schuyler, before we get into criticisms of the movement, could we at first try to get on the table what precisely it stands for? Mr. X, would you like to comment?
Yes. First, though, I would like to point out that we who are Muslims, who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, don't accept the term Negro. We stand against that. And I would like to declare myself, I'm not the number 2 leader of the Muslim movement because we don't think of ourselves in that light. We have one God, whose proper name is Allah. We have one leader, who in America here is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We are one people, and we have one aim, and that's the upliftment and the betterment of our people here in America who are called Negroes, and where the objectives and the program of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad differs perhaps from the objectives and the programs and methods of these other groups that represent the so-called Negro. Most of the other groups, their method of operation has a tendency to lead us to believe that it'll take us another 1,000 years if we follow their tactic. Whereas we who are Muslims, we're not willing to wait another 100 years.
Well, now, in this uplift of the black man and unwilling to wait, what specifically do you want to do?
Number one, I think it should be pointed out clearly that as Muslims, we are not a political group, nor are we a civic group, but rather we are a religious group. When I say that we're not a political group, it's being made plain there that we are not relying on the politicians for a political solution, because experience has taught us that in the past the politicians have promised but never delivered. And if we rely on a politician, we feel we'll be going right around in circles like our people have been doing here in America 100 years since Lincoln issued the so-called Emancipation Proclamation.
Well, not relying on politicians, Mr. X, is it not correct that the Muslims seek to completely separate the black and the white man in America and to win and establish for the Negro their own homeland in several states of America?
Still, that's religion with us. If it was religion for Moses 4,000 years ago to be missioned by God to separate the slaves in that day from the slave master of that day, complete separation, not integration, and still the Christians and Jews both today regard Moses not as a politician but as a religious leader and a religious man motivated by religion completely. We feel that what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is doing here in America today in demanding a complete separation of this slave from his slave master, and as Moses asked for a land of his own flowing with milk and honey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is likewise asking for a land for us flowing with the sweet milk and honey of freedom, justice, and equality.
Well, accepting as Mr. Scholar.
Just wait a minute now. At the risk of going into politics, I would like to know how any group in the United States is going to separate part of the United States for them to live in without having something to do with politics. Do you plan to do this through warfare?
Sir, I don't think that it's necessary to bring about any warfare. If the ex-slave in America has to go to war with his former slave master to get what is his by right, then that in itself is a condemnation of the former slave master. If Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation 100 years ago, which means we're supposed to be free, we're supposed to be citizens, we're supposed to be protected by the Constitution that we fight and die for, and yet at the same time today, the so-called Negro is knocking at the White House door, still begging his master to pass legislation that will give him recognition or protection by the Constitution that he is supposed to represent him. I think, sir, that the man who is depriving him of these rights cannot open up his mouth and say that it would be war. It would be wrong to go to war against him to get these things.
Gentlemen, before we go further into techniques, if you will excuse me, Mr. Scholar, I would still like to get out here the full program of the Muslim religion in America. We now have the desire for a separate grouping in some states of America. Mr. Baldwin, would you comment on your understanding of other purposes of the movement?
It's very difficult to talk about it in these terms, I think. I think that the Muslim movement is involved with power, and I know about power, but it's involved also with morality and identity. And this is the argument I have with Mr. X. When Malcolm X says that actually he's got a very good thing going for him, the Muslim movement does, because after all, what they are asking for is what the country is also on the record been asking for. A total separation of the races is what Mississippi wants and Georgia wants, and on the basis of the record, what the country wants. Now, it isn't what I want.
Pardon me, doesn't Mr. X and the Muslim movement call for the separation of the races